For what it's worth, I actually have no problem with fat shaming. In fact, I encourage it. Again, I'm an anarchist. I'm not a Christian progressive. This whole hurting your feelings thing is really not that important to me. Fat shaming is an example of what anarchists refer to as informal social control mechanisms. Okay, maybe you've never heard an anarchist say that, but it's in all the textbooks, right? It's what we promote as a replacement for state institutions. And in fact, we do talk about peer pressure quite a bit. There's a giant level of inherent statism in erecting, all these things that require policing, but are really just a lot of bourgeois fantasies and nonsense upon stilts. Good for you if you got all the references there. But you'll see this all the time, right? You'll see people that call themselves anarchists and then they want to be the thought police. It's a contradiction. You're an anarchist or you're the thought police. Make a choice. You can't be both, right? But one of the major concepts underlying anarchism is that we don't have police. We do need to control each other informally, but we're looking at ways to break down policing, not erect them. So those people, like I say, you can call them, Christian progressives if you want, or, authoritarian Marxists or some other thing, but they're not anarchists. They can't be. It's a contradiction in terms. And a few hours after that, I came back with an expansion of my thought here. No. I think this whole idea of comparing categories is absurd to begin with, because I don't like putting people in categories. I don't like to define you by, this category that's arbitrary, right? But being gay and being black are similar in at least one way. It doesn't harm anybody, right? I think we can all agree that we can't really change our skin color without an extreme expense. Can we change our orientation? I don't care, right? I don't care if you made a choice to be gay or not. If you chose to be gay, good for you. Have fun. I don't care. It's the question of harm that's important, okay? Being gay doesn't harm anybody. That's the argument from a liberal perspective. You can take another argument if you want, but if you want to call yourself a liberal, the important part is the harm principle. That's liberalism. Standard liberalism. Right in the center of the important book on liberalism, okay? The harm principle is also very important to anarchists. As an anarchist, I go back to the harm principle all the time. It's sometimes articulated as a non-aggression principle. That's a principle that's on both the right and the left of the libertarian movement. It's the one thing that the right libertarians have picked up from the left is the non-aggression principle. So there's a big point of agreement there. If you're getting bogged down in the question of choice, you're exiting liberalism and aligning with those Christian progressives again, okay? The whole question about whether being gay is a choice or not is only meaningful in the Christian narrative. Liberals don't care if it's a choice or not. They care if it's harmful or not, okay? They care if, in fact, there's an implicit assumption that it is a choice, right? And they care if your choice is harmful or not, right? And with homosexuality, the harm issue is really at the center of academic liberalism. It is in some ways even the defining issue of academic liberalism because it's so prominent in the text by Mill. You basically can't call yourself a liberal if you're taking this choice issue on homosexuality. You have to call yourself something else, okay? So what about being fat then? Is that a choice? Probably, but again, who cares? The important issue to a liberal and an anarchist, both of us, both liberals and anarchists, the important issue to us is whether it produces harm. Okay? Now this is a complex point because there's a few things to think about. Does, going off into the corner and stuffing your face, does that harm anybody? No. Not immediately, obviously, right? You can make the argument, I'm fat, I'm unhealthy, it doesn't harm anybody, fuck you, right? Okay, but we haven't really thought about this very carefully, right? First of all, is food scarcity, right? You could say, you're eating all the food, so therefore you're harming, the starving kids in Africa that don't have food, right? That's harm. sure, that's harm. Is it really an issue? Well, in advanced industrial societies, we don't really have issues with food scarcity. We have issues with food distribution. We have issues with currency, right? You walk into a store and there's food rotting, and then you walk across the street and there's people starving or people hungry. It's pretty stupid, really, when you think about it. But even so, even with our poor distribution systems, it gets from A to B, right? You don't hear about people starving to death very often. People figure out a way. It's flawed deeply, but it's there, right? So is food scarcity really an issue? Not really in advanced industrial societies. It's not. Our issues with distribution, and that's basic anarchist arguments as well, right? So we come up with things like food not bombs that takes food from stores that are going to throw it away and distribute it to people that need it. My bigger concern is healthcare, which is in fact scarce. When you take poor care of yourself, you do consequently harm others by wasting resources that are being inefficiently distributed. If you don't like that language, then maybe you're on the wrong side of the spectrum. You want to talk about, how you should be able to just do whatever you want, and it's a free country, okay. Mr. Republican. It follows that society has a valid mandate to fat shame you. The people that call themselves liberals nowadays want to talk about individual rights theory while ignoring the most important questions of social harm. I don't pretend I'm a liberal to start with, I'm a socialist. It's obvious how this makes sense to me. But liberals have lost the plot if they're going to be walking around thinking we all have the right to waste resources for no good reason. That kind of thinking isn't even Christian, okay? It's only Christian on the most base surface level. Christianity was actually constructed in an economy where food scarcity was a real issue, which is why there are social coercive mechanisms built into Christianity that relegate gluttony to being a sin, right? Christians should be fat shaming you if they want to go back in the past when their religion was a relevant social organization, and food was scarce, and fat shaming was a way to deal with that, right? What you're arguing for is more along the lines of what might be referred to as nihilism. This idea that we should just live in excess and tell everybody to fuck off. It's utilitarianism, certainly, but basically so. It's maximizing utility in we have to define what pleasure is, right? If you take the most basic level of what pleasure is, then sure, right? Just stuffing your face full of food is base utilitarianism. Most utilitarians are a little bit smarter than that, right? It's Satanism, unquestionably, in the sense that it appeals to animal instincts, right? I'm an animal, I'm just going to eat, that's Satanism. But what it really is objectivism in the sense of it upholding selfishness as a virtue. Whenever you hear these fat right activists talking, they're actually operating on the far right of the political spectrum. Okay, you can bring in ideas like nihilism, you can bring in ideas like objectivism, but their arguments are not coherently liberal because being fat causes social harm. They're not coherently socialist or anarchist because of the distributive justice issue, if not in food then in healthcare. And they're not even coherently Christian because gluttony is sinful. If you want to take these fat rights activists, positions, do it. Just don't pretend you're left wing, because you're not. You should be operating on the right side of the spectrum. You should be organizing, with the Tea Party, not with the left. And when you wonder why people like me get up and they walk out of these left-wing groups and then they don't come back, that's why. Because you're pushing these ideas that don't make any sense in a left-wing political narrative. It's selfishness, I'm sorry.